Welcome to Tartarian Tales number 56. We are back, and this one I found in a book that I did not expect. It was in the Tartaria search, and I found this book, A Relation of the Invasion and Conquest of Florida by the Spaniards with Fernando de Soto, and I was like, where's there Tartary in this book or anything about it? And in the end, there is a chapter about the Emperor of China in West Tartary and all over Tartary in the I600s. So, very interesting. I was actually looking up Florida stuff, and we'll have a Florida video out in a bit, maybe featuring something from this video, but I got hooked with the Tartarian Tales, and so it's time to jump back in, and this will probably spark a few more that I've got in the wings waiting to be unveiled. So, here we go. It's a very interesting take. I don't think I've read this one before, but check out the book, check out the link below, and see what you can find. Enjoy the pictures. I've got a lot of pictures that I found of people that were defined as Tartarians in their art and just what they look like, their clothing, their style, kind of from old books, a Google search or DuckDuckGo search, and some other cool architecture and all kinds of interesting stuff. This is the table of contents for the book, that Florida book, so take a look at it. I always love showing the table of contents because you never know what you will find. And here we go. Let's get started and see what comes up here. This has a lot of information about Tartary. So, a journey of the Emperor of China into West Tartary in the year I683. This year, the Emperor of China, being in the 13th year of his reign, made a journey into West Tartary with the Queen, his grandmother, who goes by the name of the Queen Mother. He set out the 6th of July, accompanied with above 70,000 men and 100,000 horse. He would needs have me go along with him and one of the two fathers who are at the court of Pekin, of whom he left the choice to me. I pitched upon Father Philip Grimaldi, because he is best known and perfectly well skilled in the mathematics. The emperor undertook that progress for several reasons. The first was to keep his forces in continual exercise, as well in time of peace and war, and therefore, having settled a firm peace in all the parts of that vast empire, he recalled out of the several provinces his best troops hither, and hath resolved in council every 3 years to make expeditions of this nature in several seasons, to teach them by pursuing stags, wild boars, bears, and tigers, to overcome the enemies of the empire, or at least to hinder that the luxury of China and too much repose may not soften their courage and make them degenerate from their primitive valor. The truth is, these ways of hunting look liker in military expedition than a pastime, for as I have already observed, the emperor had in his retinue 100,000 horse and above 70,000 men, all armed with arrows and scimitars, divided into companies and marching after their colors in order of battle, with beat of drums and sound of trumpets. Whilst they hunted, they inverted whole mountains and forests, as if they had been towns they were about to besiege, in that imitating the huntings of the eastern Tartarians, which I mentioned in my last letter. That army had its van, its rear and main body, its right and left wings commanded by so many general officers and little kings. There was a necessity during the space of above 70 days they were upon the march, that provisions and ammunition would be carried about for them in wagons, upon camels, horses, and mules, in very rough and difficult ways, for in all West Tartary, I call it Western, not with reference to China, which lies westward of it, but with relation to the East Tartary, there is nothing to be found but rocks and mountains, hills and dales. There are neither towns nor villages, nor indeed any houses there. The inhabitants lodge in tents, pitched here and there in the fields. They are for the most part herdsmen, and remove their tents from one valley to another, according as the pastures are better or worse, where they feed cattle, horse, and camels. They have no breed of hogs, nor of any of those other creatures which in other places are bred in towns and villages, as pullets and geese, but only of such as an uncultivated land can feed with the herbs that grow naturally of themselves. They spend their time either in hunting or else in doing nothing at all, and as they neither sow nor labor the land, so they have no crop, but live on milk, cheese, and flesh, and have a kind of liquor not unlike to our brandy, wherein they carouse and make themselves often drunk. In a word, from morning till night, all their care is to eat and drink like the beasts and herds they keep. They have nevertheless their priests, whom they call Llamas, for whom they have a singular veneration, wherein they differ from the Eastern Tartars, who for most part have no religion on or believe at all in any god. In short, both the one and the others are slaves, and in all things depend on the wills of their masters, whose religion and manners they blindly embrace and follow, like to their beasts in that too, which go whither men lead or drive them, and not where they ought to go. This part of Tartary lies beyond that prodigious wall of China, about 1,000 Chinese furlongs, that's to say above 300 European miles, and bears from northeast to north. The emperor marched on horseback at the head of his army over these depart places, over craggy mountains, distant from the highway, all day long exposed to the heat of the sun, the rains, and all the inconveniences of the weather. Many who have been in the late wars assured me that they had not suffered so much during that time as during this match of hunting, so that the emperor, whose chief end was to keep his troops in exercise, has completely performed what he intended. The second reason he had for making that progress was that he might keep the Western Tartars in awe and prevent the pernicious designs which they might hatch against the state. And that made him enter their country with so great an army and so great preparatives of war, taking a train of artillery along with him, which he ordered now and then to be discharged in the valleys, that by the noise and fire that broke out of the mouths of the dragons with which they are adorned, he might spread terror and fear upon the road. Wow, so highways and all these things, very interesting. Highways, trains, it seems like, rail. Besides all this retinue, he would also be attended by all the marks of grandeur which environ him at the court of Peking, Tartar city, by that multitude of drums, trumpets, timbrels, and other instruments of music, which play in concert while he is at table, and with the noise whereof he enters and comes out of his palace. All this he did to terrify those barbarous people by that external pomp, and to imprint in them that fear and reverence which is due to the imperial majesty. For the Empire of China never had at any time more dreadful enemies than the Western Tartars, who, beginning on the east of China, surround it with vast numbers of people and block it up to the north and west. And it was against their incursions that a Chinese emperor built that great wall, which divides China from their country. I have crossed it 4 times and narrowly considered it, and without exaggeration I may say that the 7 wonders of the world put together are not comparable to this work, and all that fame hath published concerning it among the Europeans comes far short of what I myself have seen. I wonder if the old 7 wonders of the world are the same as the ones from now. Interesting. I admired it particularly for 2 things. First, that in that long extent from east to west, it runs along not only vast fields, but also over most high mountains, upon which it rises gradually and is fortified by intervals with great towers, that are not distant from one another above 2 crossbow shot. Upon our return, I had the curiosity to measure the height of it in one place by means of an instrument, and found it in that part to be 1,037 geometrical foot above the horizon, so that it is not to be conceived how such a prodigious bulwark could be raised to that height in a dry country and full of mountains, where they were obliged with incredible labor to bring from afar the water, bricks, mortar, and all the necessary materials for the raising of so great a work. The other thing that surprised me was that this wall is not carried on upon the same line, but turns and winds in several places according to the disposition of the mountains, in such a manner that instead of one wall it may be said there are 3, which encompass all that great part of China. But after all, the monarch, who in our days hath united the Chinese and Tartars under one dominion, hath done somewhat more for the security of China than that Chinese emperor who built that long wall. For having reduced the Western Tartars, partly by cunning and partly by force, he hath obliged them to go and live 300 miles beyond the wall of China, and at that distance he hath distributed amongst them lands and pasturage, giving at the same time their country to other Tartars, his subjects, who at present inhabit it. Nevertheless, the Western Tartars are so powerful that if they agreed among themselves, they might still render themselves masters of all China, and East Tartary, as it is confessed by the Eastern Tartars themselves. I said that the Tartarian monarch who conquered China used artifice for subduing the western Tartars, for it was one of his chief cares by royal bounty and demonstrations of a singular affection to engage the Llamas into his interests. These, having great credit and authority over the whole nation, easily persuaded them to submit to the government of so great a prince, and it is in consideration of that service rendered to the state that the present emperor still looks upon the Llamas with a favorable eye, that he is liberal unto them and makes use of them to keep the Tartars in due obedience, though inwardly he despises them, looking upon them as a dull and blockish sort of men, who have not the least tincture of arts and sciences, wherein that princes doubtless shows a great deal of wisdom and policy in disguising so his real thoughts by those external marks of esteem and kindness. He hath divided that vast extent of land into 48 provinces, which are subject and tributary unto him. Hence it is that the emperor who at present reigns in China and in both the Tartaries may justly be called the greatest, most powerful monarch of Asia, having so many vast countries under him united and not intercepted by the lands of any foreign prince, and he alone being as the soul which gives life and motion to all the members of so great a body. For since he hath taken the government upon him, he hath never entrusted the care of it to any of the Koleos, or the great men of his court, nor hath he ever suffered any of the eunuchs of the palace, any of his pages, or any of those young lords that have been bred with him, to dispose of anything within this house, or regulate any matter by themselves. This will appear very strange, especially if one consider how his predecessors were wont to act on such occasions. With wonderful equity he punishes the great as well as the small. He turns them out of their places and degrades them from their dignity, always proportionating the punishment to the serious heinousness of their crime. He himself takes cognizance of the affairs that are handled in the royal council and in the other tribunals, requiring an exact account of the judgments and sentences that have been passed therein. In a word, he disposes of all, and orders everything by himself, and that absolute authority which he hath thus taken to himself is the cause that the greatest lords of the court and those of the highest quality in the empire, even the princes of the blood themselves, never appear in his presence, but with profound respect and reverence. Very interesting. Sounds kind of like now the shadow leaders of this world. After all, the Llamas or Tartarian priests, of whom we have been speaking, are not only esteemed by the people, but also by the lords and princes of their nation, who for politic reasons show them a great deal of friendship, and that makes us fear that the Christian religion will not find so easy an entry into West Tartary. They have a great power also upon the mind of the Queen Mother, who is of their country, and at present 70 years of age. They have often told her that the sect whereof she makes profession hath none more declared enemies than us, and it is a kind of miracle, or at least a special protection of God, that notwithstanding this, the emperor, who hath a great deal of respect and esteem for her, hath still heaped honor and favors upon us, always considering us in another guise manner than he does the Llamas. And the Tibetan Llamas, remember, keep that in mind, these are all connected to Tibet. During our progress, the princes and chief officers of the army, going often to make their court to the queen, and we being advised to do the like also, we thought fit first to consult a courtier that has a great kindness for us, and who speaks in our favors to the emperor when we have any business. This lord, going into the prince's tent, told him what passed, and immediately coming out again, said to us, "The emperor hath given me to understand that it is not necessary you should attend the queen as others do," which convinced us that the princess had no kindness for us. The third reason that engaged the emperor into this progress was his health, for he hath bound by a pretty long experience that when he stays too long at Peking, he never fails to fall into some sickness, which he prevents by means of such progresses. For all the while they continue, he keeps no company with women, and, which may seem very strange, there was not a woman in all that great army, except those who attended the Queen Mother, and that's a new thing, too, that she accompanied the king this year, the like being never practiced before but once, when he took the 3 queens with him to the capital city of the province of Liaotum to visit the sepulchres of their ancestors. Oh, I'd like to see what that is. Leaotum, the province of. The Emperor and Queen Mother intended also by that journey to avoid the excessive heat that is at Peking during the dog days, for in that part of Tartary there blows so cold a wind in the months of July and August, especially in the nighttime, that people are obliged to wear thick clothes and furs. The reason that may be given for so extraordinary a cold is that the region lies very high and is full of mountains. Amongst others, there is one of which, for 5 or 6 days' march, we were always going upwards. The Emperor, being desirous to know how much it surpassed in height the plans of Peking, which are about 300 miles distant from it, having upon our return measured above 100 mountains that are upon the road, we found that it was elevated 3,000 geometrical paces above the sea that is nearest to Peking. The saltpeter wherewith these countries abound may likewise contribute to that great cold which is so violent, that digging 3 or 4 foot deep in the earth we found frozen clods and heaps of ice. A great many little kings of West Tartary came with their children from all hands, some 300 and some 500 miles, to salute the Emperor. These princes, who for most part know no other language but their mother tongue, which differs much from what is spoken in East Tartary, with their eyes and gestures showed us a great deal of civility. Some amongst them have traveled to Peking to see the court and had seen our church there. A day or two before we arrived at the mountain, which was the period of our journey, we met a little king of great age who was coming back from the Emperor. Perceiving us, he stopped with all his retinue and made his interpreter ask which of us it was that was called Now Hayao. One of our servants having made a sign that it was I, the prince accosted me with much civility, and told me that of a long time he had known my name, and that he desired to be acquainted with me. With the same signs of affection he spake also to Father Grimaldi. The favorable reception he had from him at that time gives us some grounds to hope that our religion may find easy access to these princes, especially if their esteem be gained by means of the mathematics. And if there be any design to propagate the faith as in their country, the words are cut off, the surest way to succeed, for many reasons that I have not time to allege here, would be to begin first with the other more remote Tartars, who are not subjects of this empire. From thence one might proceed to these, advancing by little and little towards China. During the whole progress, the Emperor continued to express his goodwill towards us by the singular favors he did us in sight of his army, which he did not to anybody else. Meeting us one day in a great valley, where we were taking the height and distance of some mountains, he stopped with all the court, and calling to us at a great distance, he asked us in the Chinese language, How mo? That's to say, are you in health? Afterwards, he put a great many questions to us in Tartarish concerning the height of these mountains, which I answered in the same language also. Then turning to the lords that were about him, he spake to them of us in most obliging terms, as I was told that very evening by the prince his uncle, who was then by him. He hath besides expressed his kindness to us by causing dishes to be sent from his table to our tent, and sometimes honoring us so far as to make us eat in his own, with that regard to our days of fasting and abstinence, that whensoever he did us that honor, he sent us only such dishes as we could make use of. The Emperor's eldest son, after his father's example, showed us likewise much kindness, for being forced to make a stop for above 10 days because of a fall he had from a horse, whereby he received a hurt in the right shoulder and part of the army, staying for him whilst the Emperor with the rest continued his hunting. He failed not all that while to send us once, sometimes twice a day, victuals from his table. But to conclude, we look upon all these favors of the royal family as the effects of a particular providence, which watches over us in the Christian interest, and for which we have so much the more reason to thank God. Then the Emperor's affections appears not always so constant towards the great men of the empire, nor even towards the princes of the blood. As to the other particulars of our journey, they are much like to those that happened last year in our progress to East Tartary, which I described at large in my last letter. That's to say, we were accommodated with the Emperor's horses in litters, lodged in the tents, and eat at the table of the prince, his uncle, to whom he particularly commended us. For above 600 miles that we made in going and coming, for we returned not the same way we went. He caused a great way to be made over the mountains and valleys for the convenience of the Queen Mother, who is carried in a chair. He caused a great many bridges also to be cast over rivers and torrents, rocks and points of mountains to be cut through with incredible labor and charge. Father Grimaldi will describe the other circumstances in his letter. I have spoken elsewhere of the fruit that religion may reap from our journey. Let it suffice at this place to say that the Emperor, whose will and pleasure we cannot in the least resist, without exposing this mission to manifest danger, commanded us to follow him. I have nevertheless spoken twice to that court lord who is our particular friend, that he might get us excused from such long journeys, and especially myself, who am not now of an age fit for them. I have endeavored to obtain at least that the Emperor would be satisfied with one of us. Upon the road the letters of our fathers came always safe to my hands, and I had the convenience of writing to them by the couriers that went continually to the royal city, or came from thence. I wrote this in haste, that I may persist in giving you an account of our occupations. So again, i600s, and this is just a glimpse of what it's like from the Spanish perspective to enter these realms of Tartary and China, which seem as if they're entering an entirely another world. And they always talk about how they seem to know that these people are so strong-willed and strong-minded and kind of set in their ways that their Christianity is not going to go anywhere. And so it makes you think, if all these things were based on truth, they would never have fear of people not accepting it. They only have fear of people not accepting things that are forced upon them, thrust upon them, and not right. Kind of like the last couple years, where we all felt exactly what was wrong about the whole situation, and a lot of people didn't. But there was nothing those people could say on the news or anywhere that would get us to change our minds. Kind of like the Tartars. I wonder if we've inherited that strength of mind from them. Or maybe, who knows. But either way, they talk about the power and all these things and this different thing. And these guys, for the Spanish people in their realm to talk about and the history of the Tartars and all these things, it's all stereotypes, it's all judgment, it's all just merely from observation and hearsay with the guys that these people are subordinates and inferior to them. So nothing can really be trusted except the pure observations and the little kind of glimpses and hints in between these cracks, reading between the lines of what they say and infer, and the little things they observe and different things like that. Like even just how the king and queen was able to, the queen was getting carried hundreds of miles on a chair and they were just building bridges for her in front of her. Like, who is this army? And this army that could build the Great Wall of China. You must have had, if you have a population of probably 1 million people building, imagine what the population is of the actual, the lands and the dominion that you run. It must be massive. It must have gone up into the billions several times during this world. And if America was inhabited pre all this time, or maybe the world's all other places were inhabited with all those buildings we see that are kind of impossible to be built by horse and carriage, then the population of the world could be even more than it is today at one point in time, and it probably was. If you had the Mississippi River, just a massive civilization, like the Nile, but even bigger, the Nile flourishing all over the place. The Amazon must have had some amazing things until it was probably flooded as well. Who knows where all these people and things come from and how prevalent this Tartaria was all over the place, or just in general, the people who had the power, whatever they call themselves. They might have been Tartaria there, or Chinese there, and somewhere else, something totally different. It was so easy, it always is easy to separate and segregate information and give certain people just what they need while sucking everything else from them. So, again, take from it what you will. Take a look at the book, take a look at the links, some cool stuff about Florida, which I will get into because that's a whole nother mystery. Florida's been on the map for a very long time, and they find Tartarian things all over America and different traits in the people and everything. So we are just continually discovering stuff. Let's keep it going, and hopefully one day we will dig into reality and find just absolute treasures everywhere. We have to. Archaeology needs to be revived to fit this narrative that we are all creating and eliminate the nonsense of the past. So, let's do it. Bless you all.
Tartarian Tales!